Welcome to Bookcase. Our guest today is Brooklyn-based writer Joshua Henkin and his book, which is about to be released, The World Without You. Welcome to Bookcase.
Pleasure to be here.
Would you describe yourself as a pyrotechnician, as a writer?
Only a pyrotechnician if the pyrotechnics are on very low volume. I would say that the fiction I'm most drawn to is fiction that's character-driven and where you feel like the characters have taken over the book and the writer has gotten out of the way. So I think it takes a lot of revision, a lot of work to be invisible. My goal as a writer is to use language in such a way that I'm invisible.
It also takes a tremendous skill of monitoring yourself to be able to do that.
Yeah, you sort of have to sort of recede.
Why this book now?
My last book, Matrimony, took me 10 years to write. And I think of novels as being rebounds, like relationships are rebounds. And Matrimony took place over the course of 20 years and was in 2 points of view. And I wanted to write a very different kind of book. And so I wanted to write a book that was in much more confined space. This book takes place over 3 days. But I wanted it to be more sprawling in terms of character, where in many characters, different points of view. This novel is about a young man who was a journalist who was killed in Iraq. And then a year later, his family gets together for his memorial. His 3 adult sisters, his widow, his son, his parents who are splitting up. When I was a kid, I had a cousin who died of Hodgkin's disease when he was in his late 20s, and I was probably a toddler, so I don't really remember. But I remember 30 years later at a family reunion, my aunt, the mother of the guy who died, was catching us up on her life, and she started out by saying, "I have 2 sons." And we were all startled because she did have 2 sons, but one of them had died 30 years earlier. And this was her way of saying that that pain never goes away. And I was interested in that because my cousin's wife eventually got remarried and had a family and moved on. And I was interested in the gap between how a parent responds to losing a child and how a spouse responds to losing a spouse, and the gap between that.
And what's the difference?
In general, the spouse moves on in a way that the parent doesn't. And that was the inspiration for the book, the distance between the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law in terms of how they experience it. But with all fiction, you start with one thing, and then the book expands in ways you couldn't have anticipated. And so the book ended up being about these 3 sisters and about a lot of other things.
It's very interesting you say that because you've used the present tense, you know, and you have this collection of characters between the sister and the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law, which feel they are almost unable to be present at all time. You feel like there's this sort of existential undertow through the whole novel. It makes it really suck you in.
Absolutely. You know? I do think there's an existential undertow in the sense that they've all had this experience together, but they also have had separate lives, and they're each bringing things to the book, to their lives that are different. One of them is struggling with infertility. Another one is quite angry at everyone. A third one has become an Orthodox Jew and feels very alienated from the rest of the family.
You think death is a good device just to rally people around? Or?
I think the way that death hovers over the book, and this is one of the things that I had to struggle with, is how do you make Leo, the son who died, how do you make him a live character? Because he's dead and he can never appear in the book. But his memory has to hover over the book in a way that's tangible.
That's right, and you feel his shadow all through the book. I mean.
Absolutely. And so you need to filter in a lot of flashback details about him so he doesn't feel like an abstraction.
The character of Leo, as I said, is like the huge shadow. He's also a journalist. And the fact he dies, like looking for truth or trying to report what reality could be like. And I found also David, sort of minimalist approach with the words. Like he says to one of his daughters, I think it's Noel, there's circumstances where you can't know everything, or something very similar.
Yeah, I would say there's no, I mean, I think in good fiction there's never any message. I think that, you know, messages are for philosophers and theologians and sociologists and politicians. And I think what novelists, at least the kind of novelist that I am, do is that we try to make characters come to life. We tell a story. And it's not that there aren't any ideas in the book, but the ideas come in through the back door. And what a fiction writer has to do is focus on the characters. My goal is to make the reader feel at the end of the book that he or she knows my characters as well as or better than the people in their own lives. They don't have to like the characters. There are plenty of, I mean, think of, I don't know, Nabokov, think of Flannery O'Connor, of Martin Amis, all writers who often write about characters that you wouldn't want to hang out with in real life. But those characters jump off the page. And so my goal is not to convey messages, but to make characters come to life.
But the Matrimony was about a family tragedy.
Right.
And you mentioned Friends and Correction, which is about family as well. I mean, I feel like it's a big American themes of the family. You know, where do you situate yourself in that descriptions?
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, I think it's not just an American theme. It's it's a cross-cultural theme. I mean,
well, you could have written a novel, a picaresque novel, or
I could have written
Wandering Jew. I mean, that's how I call
right.
it.
You're right. I could have written those things, and I tend not to. I tend to write traditional, realist, character-driven fiction in the John Cheever, Richard Yates, Alice Munro, Jonathan Franzen mode. I mean, Flannery O'Connor once said that anyone who's lived until the age of 10 has enough material to write about for a lifetime. And she certainly wasn't advocating writing autobiographically. She just meant that the things that are closest to us often resonate most. So yeah, I think family to me is endlessly interesting.
You used a lot of cross-references in your answers to me so far. Is that some sort of residual from the teaching you do at the Brooklyn College?
Could be. I mean, yeah, I do teach. It's interesting. I have writer friends who don't teach, who can't teach, who wouldn't want to teach, and they perceive. I mean, I think they just wouldn't know how to do it because they're instinctively intuitive writers, and they're doing certain things correctly, but they're not even aware that they're doing things correctly. Early on, I knew how to help people with the problems in their stories, and it took me longer to be able to do it myself. So I had to teach myself to become a more intuitive writer. And also, I'm a relatively social person, and I like to be around people. And when you're a writer, that's very solitary. You're spending all this time with your imaginary people, with your characters. And so teaching is certainly very helpful. And reading. I mean, I think any writer who doesn't read a lot is no good.
Why do we need fiction?
Well, I think there are so many reasons why we need fiction. I mean, I write fiction for the same reason that I read fiction, which is to get out of my own experience, to be able to take myself somewhere new and understand someone. I mean, we can all read the newspaper and understand in our brains what it's like to be different from ourselves. But to actually be transported on the wings of a story, I think broadens our horizons. And that to me is very important. We all get very focused on our narrow lives. And to be taken out of those lives on a regular basis has been very enriching for me, and I hope will be for my readers too.
So for you, it's just a sense of escapism?
It is a sense of escapism, but escapism sounds more trivial. I think it's actually something deeper.
Like a sense of order, try to find an order, or some greater order beyond yourself, so we can replicate
greater order,
life.
Greater world beyond ourselves, a sense of the mystery of life, that things are not easily reducible, that things are perplexing, to make us. I think fiction makes you think. Martin Amis, in his novel *The Information*, which is about a writer, there's a writer, and it's a farce. There's a writer on book tour, and the writer is asked by an interviewer, "What's your book about?" And he says, "My book isn't about anything. It is what it is. I wrote it in 200,000 words, and if I could have written it in fewer, I would have." And I think there's something about what that writer is saying that seems to me very true about fiction, that you can't summarize it. You can't reduce it. I think it was Franzen who said that the easier it is to summarize your book, the easier it is to summarize your novel, the worse book it is. And I think that's true. There's something about fiction that just is, and it takes you out of your experience, and there's really no substitute for it. And I think that's true of art in general. There are no summaries, there are no reductions. It's about being transported into another experience and enlarging yourself in that way.
Welcome back to Bookcase, and for our pick of the week. This week we tell you another great story, another compelling story, perfect for the summer read if you need one. And it's a book called Hystera, written by Leora Skolkin-Smith. It's a story of a woman who takes the blame for a tragic accident and who ends up, as a result, drifting from bad relationship to bad relationship, only to realize that really she wants to be sheltered from reality. To save herself from her own delusion, she decides to enter a New York psychiatric hospital. The book questions the nature of identity, who we are. Are we on thought, or are we bigger than that? So it's a fantastic and compelling read. Leora Skolkin-Smith, Hystera, published by Fiction Studio Book.